Hey, morning. So this morning, going to look at the case study for the OCRB tectonic and climatic hazards, which is we're going to look at tectonic one, a volcano, one that erupted 8 years ago, in 2010, with a brilliant pronunciation, and I'm going to try my best here. It's Eyjafjallajökull, and if you go on the internet, there's loads of Icelandic people who say it to help us out. Now the Americans couldn't pronounce it. I say the Americans, it's a little bit general, but so E15 is the common way of saying this case study. We're going to look at the causes, the impacts, and the responses. So we're going to start with the causes. Now, the eruption happened in April 2010, and essentially the causes are Iceland is right on top of a magma plume, which is the magma plume is responsible for the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So essentially the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is kind of driven by the plume underneath Iceland. So underneath Iceland is a rising plume of magma, which rises up, hits the crust above it, and then separates out the two continental plates. So there's Eurasian plate to the east, which is moving eastwards, and the North American plate, which is being driven westwards by this plume. And Iceland sits bang in the middle of that. So it's a constructive plate boundary, and as the magma rises, it punches through and creates volcanic eruptions. Now, just to make it more complicated, there, because Iceland, due to its latitude, so its northerly point is about 66 degrees north, but because of that, there's an ice cap on the centre of Iceland, and Eyjafjalla has an ice cap, so it's covered with snow. So that's going to lead on to our second point. So that was the causes. There's lots of volcanoes bubbling away in Iceland all the time, and they kind of take turns erupting. But in 2010, it was Eyjafjalla's turn, and to be honest, if it hadn't put ash into the sky, which grounded all the aeroplanes, I don't think we would have paid a lot of attention to it. But that moves smoothly onto the consequences or the effects or the impacts. Full stop. So the second part of the case study talks about the impacts of Eyjafjalla, and of course if you're going for a grade 7, 8, 9, then if you're looking at the impacts, you need to do some work on categorization of economic, social, political, potentially long and short term, or primary and secondary. So you really need to be doing that at the higher end, but I'm just going to rattle through a few facts. The problem is I'm in my car and I'm not driving, you'd be pleased to know, so I haven't got all my information with me. But essentially, the biggest impact, of course, was that flights were grounded. That wasn't a primary impact though. The first thing was that when the eruption happened, all the snow on top, or the glacier that was on top of Eyjafjalla was melted, so there was massive flooding, which is called a jökulhlaup, I think, something like that in Icelandic. And what a local farmer, as the flooding happened, this is a bit of a legendary story, but a local farmer saw that the flood was going to wash away the main road which goes around the edge of Iceland. So what he did was he basically knocked down a bridge with his digger to allow a lot of the water out to the sea. So Eyjafjalla is located, in the extreme south of Iceland, like 6 o'clock on a clock face, and a few kilometres from the sea. And so he knocked through this bridge, which allowed a lot of the water to escape. The idea being that the bridge was destroyed, but the road was kept. So there was mass flooding. No one died because of the eruption, but a lot of the local water source was polluted. And in terms of effects, locally to Iceland, apart from the surrounding area, there wasn't that much impact. The impact was, of course, globally, which is a bit unique, I guess, for an eruption. Recent eruptions. Ash was sent into the sky, and the jet stream was taking the ash cloud southwards, and very quickly, in a matter of days, the ash from the eruption was spread across the whole of northern Europe, and they started to ground the flights because they were nervous about what the volcanic material would do to the engines. So they started to ground them, and very quickly almost all air travel over Europe, particularly northern Europe, was stopped. So that was the impacts. Poison local water source, which meant that some of the local animals would die. They had to evacuate, of course. The flooding caused a lot of damage, particularly locally, but not a problem long term. Short term, of course, people couldn't get to Iceland, but long term, it's made it even more sexy as a destination, if you can call Iceland sexy. But I've been 7 times myself. So in terms of, so the flights were grounded across Europe. I can't give you a figure on how many, but BA have estimated a certain amount of money they lost. I think it might be like £50 million maybe, and there were thousands of flights grounded, and people got stuck all around the world. I got stuck in Italy on a rugby tour with a load of year nines, which was a bit awkward. We had to drive back. Other people got stuck. I mean, you've probably got your own stories, but there was a massive impact, and that had some knock-on economic and social impacts. So in terms of responses, there was obviously responses is a tricky one, because responses can happen, to make it more complicated, they can happen before an event, during an event, and after. So obviously a response to Eyjafjallajökull was for the airlines to start having a risk assessment plan for if something like this happens again. And there's another volcano, Ketla, in Iceland, and which is bubbling away, and people are thinking, oh, what will happen? And so one of the responses is to be more aware of the impacts that volcanoes can have. Immediate responses were evacuation. Long-term responses were to put in a risk assessment, and there's a text message system that Iceland use, and again, I'm not sure if that was improved as a result of the eruption, but yeah, that's a response. Another response is, of course, one of the impacts was to ground flights, but the response to that impact, and this is where it gets tricky, an impact is something that happens. A response is something that we do to mitigate the impact. So a response to the flights being grounded is where various countries had to set up hubs to get their people home. So apart from that, I hope that's enough to get you going. That's Eyjafjallajökull, something like that.